At 2 in the morning, I watched my grandson hold a syringe meant for me. The notification had pulled me from the edge of sleep. A small chime from the security camera app Sarah had installed 6 months ago when she'd visited from Seattle. "For your safety, Grandma," she'd said, programming the sensors herself, showing me how to check the feeds from my phone. I hadn't told her I kept the phone on my nightstand now, volume low but never silent, watching the empty rooms of my house like a night watchman guarding something precious that everyone else had already written off as lost. The camera showed the front door opening, no key turning, no lock clicking, just the door swinging inward as if the house itself had exhaled and let them in. My grandson Marcus entered first, his movements careful and practiced in the dim glow of the porch light I'd forgotten to turn off. Behind him, a woman in navy scrubs I'd never seen before carried a small medical bag. I didn't move, didn't reach for the light, didn't call out. I watched. They moved through my living room, the room where Robert and I had raised 3 children, where we'd celebrated 42 anniversaries, where I'd sat alone for the past 8 years trying to remember what my own voice sounded like when I wasn't apologizing or agreeing or simply saying yes to make everyone else comfortable. Marcus gestured toward the hallway. The woman nodded. They were heading toward my bedroom, where I was supposed to be sleeping. I pressed the record button on the app. The red dot appeared in the corner of the screen. Evidence, I thought, though I didn't yet know of what. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. The third one from my door, the one Robert had always meant to fix. Marcus whispered something I couldn't hear through the phone's small speaker. The woman responded with a hand gesture. "Wait, be quiet," something like that. Professional. As if they'd done this before. As if I was a procedure, not a person. They reached my door. I had perhaps 30 seconds before they entered. 30 seconds to decide whether to confront them or to pretend I was still the woman they thought I was, the one who didn't notice, didn't question, didn't fight back, because fighting back required energy I'd spent decades learning to conserve for everyone else's needs. I set the phone face down on my nightstand, darkening the room. I closed my eyes. I steadied my breathing to the slow, deep rhythm of sleep, and I waited. The door opened so quietly I might have missed it if I hadn't been listening for it. Marcus's voice, barely a whisper. "She's out." Footsteps approaching my bed, the smell of antiseptic, the professional rustle of the nurse preparing something from her bag, latex gloves snapping on, the click of a syringe cap being removed. I kept my eyes closed, kept breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was certain they could see it through the blankets. "Standard sedative," the woman said softly. "She'll be drowsy but responsive for about 20 minutes, enough time for the signatures. Then she'll sleep for 6 hours and won't remember anything clearly." Signatures. The word landed like a stone in water. ripples spreading outward through my understanding. "And you're sure she won't?" "I've done this 12 times, the woman interrupted. "She'll be compliant. They always are at this age." At this age. As if being 74 meant I'd already vacated my own body, left it empty for them to move through like a house whose owner had died. I felt the cold alcohol swab on my upper arm, the brief sting of the needle, the slow burn of whatever they were putting into me spreading through my muscle. "Done," the woman said. "Give it 3 minutes." They stepped away from the bed. I heard them move to the doorway, waiting, watching me. I kept my breathing steady. In, out, like I'd learned in the grief counselling group after Robert died, the one my son David had insisted I attend because he'd said I needed to process and move forward, though what he'd really meant was that my sadness was inconvenient for him. 3 minutes passed. 4, 5. "Mrs. Chen?" Marcus's voice, louder now. "Grandma." I let my eyelids flutter, opened them slowly. The room swam. Not from the drug, which I could feel beginning to pull at the edges of my consciousness, but from the effort of controlling my own face, keeping it slack and confused instead of letting it show what I really felt. Rage. "Marcus?" I made my voice soft, uncertain. What time is it?" "It's late, Grandma. Sorry to wake you." He moved closer, his face coming into focus. 26 years old. Robert's eyes, my son's calculating smile. "We need you to sign something. Just a formality. For the house." The house? The 4-bedroom colonial Robert and I had bought in 1978 for $60,000, worth $700,000 now, according to the property assessment that came last month. The house I'd promised Robert I'd stay in as long as I could manage. The house they wanted to take from me. What kind of formality? I let my words slur slightly. "Just updating the deed," Marcus said smoothly. "Making sure everything's in order for estate planning. Dad sent me over with the papers." Dad. My son David, who hadn't visited in 3 months, but called every week to ask about my financial situation, and whether I'd thought about downsizing, and if I'd made any decisions about the future. His future, he meant, built on what remained of mine. The nurse stepped forward with a clipboard. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see papers clipped to it, official-looking, dotted lines for signatures. I couldn't read the text from where I lay, but I didn't need to. I'd seen documents like these before, 8 months ago, when I'd been in the hospital for pneumonia and had woken up to find David asking me to sign a power of attorney just in case, just temporarily, just to make things easier for everyone. I'd signed it. In my hospital bed, weak and frightened and wanting to be a good mother, wanting to make things easier. I'd been making things easier my entire life. I should. I moved as if to sit up, then let myself fall back against the pillows. I should call my lawyer. It's 2 in the morning, Grandma. Lawyers are sleeping. Marcus placed the clipboard on my lap, put a pen in my hand. His fingers were warm, familiar. He'd been 7 when Robert taught him to tie his shoes, 12 when I'd taught him to bake Robert's favourite lemon cake. I'd loved him with the uncomplicated fullness that grandmothers are allowed. No discipline required, no mistakes to correct, just pure enjoyment of a child who carried your blood into the future. Now he was holding my hand steady over a signature line, guiding me like I was already gone. Just here, Grandma, and here, that's right. The drug pulled harder. My vision blurred at the edges. I felt my hand move, the pen touching paper, but I didn't press down, didn't complete the signature. Just let the pen rest there while I made my breathing slow, further, deeper, like I was falling asleep mid-sentence. Grandma? I didn't answer. Let my hand go limp. The pen rolled onto the blanket. Shit, Marcus muttered. Give her another minute, the nurse said. The sedative's still taking effect. They waited. I floated in that space between consciousness and performance, feeling the drug soften my thoughts, but holding on to the core of myself, the part that had finally learned to be quiet, not out of compliance, but out of strategy. After what felt like an hour, but was probably 2 minutes, I heard Marcus sigh. We'll come back tomorrow, when she's more alert. Your father won't be happy. My father can deal with it. Let's go. They left. I heard them move through the house, pausing in the living room, probably to check for valuables or documents, or anything else they could claim they'd been helping me organise. The front door closed. The house settled into silence. I waited another 10 minutes. Then I picked up my phone. The video had recorded everything. Their entry, their approach, the syringe, the papers. I downloaded it to 3 different cloud accounts Sarah had set up for me. Sent copies to my email, to Sarah's email. Then I deleted the local file and cleared the app's recent activity. Only then did I let myself sit up fully. My arm ached where the needle had entered. I could feel the sedative working through my system, trying to drag me down into the compliance they'd paid for. But I was awake now, more awake than I'd been in 8 years. On my nightstand, next to Robert's photo and the prayer book I hadn't opened since his funeral, I saw what they'd left behind in their hurry to leave. The clipboard, the papers. I picked it up, brought it close enough to read in the dim light. Durable power of attorney, financial amendment to grant full control. The words swam, but their meaning was clear. They hadn't been updating anything, they'd been taking everything. Complete control. My accounts, my investments, my house, everything Robert and I had built over 53 years of marriage, reduced to dotted lines and forged signatures, and my own son's careful plan to erase me before I was even dead. I set the papers down carefully. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. Some part of me had been waiting for this moment. The final, undeniable proof that I wasn't paranoid or oversensitive or selfish for wanting to maintain control of my own life. The proof that I was, in fact, exactly what they'd already decided I was. An obstacle, an asset, a problem to be managed, but not anymore a person who would make things easier. I didn't sleep. The sedative pulled at me for hours, trying to drag me under, but I sat in Robert's chair by the bedroom window and watched the street until dawn broke, grey and cold, over the neighbourhood we'd moved to 46 years ago, when property values meant something different and the future felt like a promise instead of a threat. The erosion had been gradual. That's what I kept thinking about as the sky lightened and the drug slowly released its grip on my thoughts. Not a sudden theft, but a careful, patient wearing away of boundaries, so slow that I hadn't recognized it as violence, hadn't known to call it that. It started the day I came home from the hospital 8 months ago. Pneumonia, severe enough that they kept me for 6 days on IV antibiotics and oxygen. Severe enough that David had driven up from Philadelphia with papers he said I needed to sign just in case. Power of attorney, healthcare proxy, emergency access to my accounts. Temporary, he'd promised, just until you're back on your feet. I'd signed them in my hospital bed, still coughing, still weak, wanting only to be a reasonable mother who didn't create additional burdens for her busy son who'd taken time off work to help. That was the first signature. After that, things began to shift in ways I noticed but didn't name. David started receiving copies of my bank statements just to help you keep track. Marcus began visiting more often, always offering to handle errands, to pay bills online, to set up automatic payments so you don't have to worry. My credit cards were replaced with new ones I hadn't requested. When I called the bank to ask why, they told me authorized users had been added to my accounts. For convenience, they said, for security. I hadn't authorized anyone. But I didn't say that. I said thank you. I said it was probably David being helpful. I said I must have forgotten agreeing to it because at 74 you're supposed to forget things, supposed to be grateful when your children take over the small tasks that prove you're still managing your own life. The visits increased. Not to see me, I understood that early on, but to check the house, to note what needed updating, to suggest, gently and with concern, that I was living in too much space for one person, that the stairs were getting dangerous, that I should really think about assisted living before I fell and no one found me for days. I smiled and nodded and offered them coffee and felt myself becoming smaller in my own home. 3 months ago, I'd found my jewellery box open on the dresser. Grandmother's pearls, the ones Robert had clasped around my neck on our wedding day, were missing. When I asked Marcus about it, he'd said they'd been appraised for insurance purposes, for my protection. They were in a safe deposit box now. He'd get me the key later. I never got the key. 2 months ago, I tried to withdraw $500 from my savings account, money I'd earned in 1985 teaching piano lessons while Robert worked double shifts at the plant. The teller had looked uncomfortable and asked me to wait. When she returned, she said there was a hold on large withdrawals. I'd need to get authorization. From whom? I asked. From the account co-holder, she said. I didn't have a co-holder. I'd opened that account in my name only, with money I'd saved from work that was mine. But when she showed me the paperwork on her screen, I saw David's name listed as joint owner, added 6 months earlier, signed with my forged signature. I could have challenged it then, could have demanded they reverse it, could have called a lawyer or made a scene or done any of the things that would have required me to believe I deserved to fight back. Instead, I'd apologized for the confusion and walked home and said nothing to anyone because I'd spent 7 decades learning that women who cause problems are difficult women, and difficult women die alone. But that was before I watched them drug me. That was before I understood the jewelry box and the bank accounts and the helpful errands. Weren't preparation for my eventual decline. They were the decline itself, orchestrated and intentional. A methodical dismantling of everything I'd built, done while I was still alive to watch it happen. The sun had fully risen now. I could hear my neighbour's car starting. Mrs. Patterson, heading to her Saturday morning yoga class, still driving herself at 81, still independent because no one had convinced her yet that independence was selfishness. I stood up. My legs were unsteady from the drug and from sitting too long in one position, but they held me. I walked to my dresser and opened the top drawer where I kept the lockbox with important documents. Birth certificates, Robert's death certificate, our marriage license, the deed to the house. The lockbox was gone. Of course it was gone. I checked the closet where I'd hidden my passport. Gone. The file folder with tax returns. Gone. They'd been thorough. They'd been planning this for months, and I'd let them walk through my house and my life, taking pieces of me until there was almost nothing left to take. Almost. I sat down on the bed and picked up my phone. The video was still safely stored in the cloud. The papers they'd left behind were still on my nightstand, and somewhere in this house I had a phone number I hadn't called in 8 years. Written on a business card tucked into the back of a book Robert had been reading when he died. Grace Chen, estate attorney. She'd been at Robert's funeral, had pressed her card into my hand, and said if I ever needed anything at all, to call. I'd thanked her and filed the card away and never thought about it again. Because I'd been too busy drowning to reach for a lifeline. I found the book on Robert's nightstand where I'd left it all these years, still bookmarked at page 247 where he'd stopped mid-chapter. The business card was exactly where I'd put it, slightly yellowed now but still readable. I dialed the number. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday. No one would answer. I expected voicemail. I expected to have to wait and to second-guess myself during the waiting, and possibly to talk myself out of whatever small rebellion I thought I was staging. Instead, Grace Chen answered on the third ring. "This is Grace's." Her voice was exactly as I remembered, clear and direct, and somehow conveying that she was already listening before I'd even begun to speak. "This is Eleanor Chen," I said, "Robert's wife, widow. We met at—" "I remember," she said. "What happened?" Not "how are you" or "is everything okay," just what happened, as if she already knew. That women my age didn't call estate attorneys at 7 in the morning unless something had gone catastrophically wrong, I told her. Not everything, not the 8 months of erosion, not the jewellery or the bank accounts, or the slow disappearance of my own autonomy. Just the essential truth. My son and grandson tried to drug me last night to force my signature on documents. I have video evidence. I need to know what I can do. Silence on the line. Not hesitation, calculation. "Are you safe right now?" Grace asked. "Yes." "Are they likely to come back today?" "I don't know." "Can you come to my office? I'm here now. I'll wait." I looked around my bedroom, at Robert's empty side of the bed, at the wall where our wedding photo used to hang before David had taken it for restoration and never returned it, at the window overlooking the garden I'd planted 40 years ago. "Yes," I said, "I can come now." I hung up, changed out of my nightgown into the navy dress I'd worn to Robert's retirement party, the one that made me feel like myself. Not like someone's elderly mother or inconvenient grandmother. I found my purse. My car keys were missing from the hook by the door, another thing that had disappeared in the name of my safety, but I had a spare set in the garage. Before I left, I took a photo of the papers they'd left behind. Then I put them in a manila envelope and sealed it. Evidence. I was learning to think in those terms now, evidence and documentation and proof, instead of trust and family and the benefit of the doubt. I drove to Grace's office in the early morning quiet, my hands steady on the wheel, the sedative finally worn off completely, and for the first time in 8 months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten existed. The dangerous, clarifying relief of being angry instead of afraid. Grace's office was on the 3rd floor of a brick building downtown that I'd passed 1,000 times without ever noticing. The waiting room was empty this early on a Saturday, decorated in muted greys and cream tones that were probably meant to be calming, but instead felt like a hospital, sterile and preparatory for bad news. Grace appeared in the doorway within seconds of my arrival, as if she'd been watching for me. She was younger than I'd remembered, maybe 50, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of the formal suit I'd seen at the funeral. Weekend clothes, clothes that said she'd come in specifically for me. "Eleanor," she said, extending her hand. "Come in." Her office had a wall of windows overlooking the street. I watched the morning traffic starting to build. People going to coffee shops and farmers' markets and Saturday errands, living normal lives where their children didn't hire nurses to drug them in their sleep. The normalcy of it felt like an accusation. Why couldn't I have that? Why had I failed so completely at the one thing I was supposed to be good at, maintaining family? I sat down in the chair across from her desk, put my purse in my lap. Didn't know how to begin. Grace didn't make me. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and uncapped a pen and said, "Tell me everything. Start wherever makes sense." So I did. I told her about the hospital, the power of attorney, the bank accounts and credit cards and missing jewellery, the lockbox, the car keys. I told her about Marcus entering my house at 2 a.m. with a stranger carrying a syringe. I showed her the video on my phone, both of us watching in silence as my grandson stood over my bed and the nurse prepared the injection, and they discussed my compliance as if I were livestock. When it finished, Grace set down her pen, looked at me. Something in her face had gone very still. "Do you still have the papers they tried to get you to sign?" she asked. I pulled the manila envelope from my purse, handed it across the desk. She opened it, read. Her jaw tightened. Then she turned to her computer and began typing rapidly, pulling up documents and legal databases and things I couldn't see from my angle. "This is forgery," she said after several minutes. "The power of attorney you signed in the hospital, I need to see that original document. But even if it was legitimate, it wouldn't authorize what they're attempting here. This amendment grants complete control. It bypasses all safeguards. And the signature..." She turned the paper toward me, pointing to a scrawled version of my name at the bottom of the page. "Is that your signature?" I looked at it. The loops were wrong. The slant was off. It looked like my name written by someone who'd practiced it but hadn't lived with it for 74 years. "No," I said. "Then we have a criminal case, attempted fraud, possibly elder abuse. And with the video evidence of forced drugging, we can move quickly." Quickly. The word sent a cold rush through my chest. Quick meant action. Action meant confrontation. Confrontation meant my son, my only son, my child, would know I'd betrayed the unspoken agreement we'd lived under my entire adult life, that I would be convenient, that I would make things easy, that I would eventually just yield. "I don't want to destroy my family," I heard myself say. Grace looked at me for a long moment. Then she closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. "Eleanor, may I be direct with you?" I nodded. "Your family is attempting to destroy you. Not metaphorically, literally. They are systematically stripping you of your autonomy, your assets, and your legal rights while you're still alive. They drugged you. They forged your signature. They have been stealing from you for months. That is not family. That is abuse. The word hung in the air between us, abuse. I'd never applied it to myself before. Abuse happened to other women, younger women, women in violent marriages, women who didn't have resources or education or the ability to simply leave, not to widowed piano teachers who lived in paid-off houses and had retirement accounts and could afford their own lawyers, but they're not. I started. Hitting you? Grace finished. Grace, Eleanor, there are many ways to hurt someone. This is one of them. I looked down at my hands. 74 years old, liver-spotted and thin-skinned, and somehow still capable of trembling like I was a child waiting to be scolded. When had I learned to be so afraid of my own son? "What do I do?" I asked. Grace opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of forms. "First, we revoke any legitimate power of attorney you signed. We file it with the court today. I can do that electronically. Second, we file a police report about the attempted drugging and forgery. Third, we go to your bank on Monday and freeze all accounts. Remove any unauthorized users. I'll go with you. Fourth, we send a cease and desist letter to your son and grandson, informing them that any further contact or attempted access to your property or finances will result in criminal charges." Each action she described felt like a door closing, a bridge burning, a final severing of the pretense that we were still a family who loved each other instead of what we actually were, predators and prey dressed up in the language of filial duty. "They'll hate me," I said. "They already see you as an obstacle," Grace said. "This just makes you an obstacle they can't remove." I thought about that, about the difference between being hated and being invisible, about the years I'd spent trying to be loved by people who only valued what they could extract from me, about Robert's hand in mine 42 years ago when I'd been diagnosed with breast cancer. His voice saying, "We'll fight this together." His absolute certainty that I was worth fighting for. He would want me to fight now. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what to sign." We worked for 2 hours. Grace drafted motions and affidavits and legal documents that transformed my Saturday morning into an act of war. I signed my real signature over and over, the one with the correct loops and the right slant, the one that said, "This is me. I am here. I still exist." Before I left, Grace asked one more question. "Do you have someone you trust? Someone who can check on you, who isn't your son or grandson?" I thought of Sarah in Seattle, my granddaughter, 28, a software engineer who sent me recipes for one-person meals and called every Sunday just to talk about nothing important, who'd installed the security cameras because she worried about me living alone but had never once suggested I shouldn't be. "My granddaughter," I said. "Sarah." "Call her," Grace said. "Tell her what's happening. You're going to need allies." The word struck me. Allies. as if this were a war. It was a war. I'd just been too polite to name it. I drove home in late morning traffic. The house looked the same from the outside. White siding, black shutters, the maple tree in the front yard that Robert had planted when David was born. But I saw it differently now. Not as my home, as my territory. Something to defend. I parked in the garage, went inside. Stood in the kitchen where I'd made thousands of meals and packed thousands of lunches and taught 3 children how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. Then I picked up my phone and called Sarah. She answered on the first ring. "Grandma, I was just thinking about you." "Sarah," I said, "I need your help. Something's happened." Her voice shifted immediately, sharper, focused. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt, but I need you to know something. Your father and Marcus," I stopped, steadied my voice. "They've been stealing from me. Last night they tried to drug me to forge my signature. I have evidence. I'm taking legal action, and I need you to know that when they find out, they're going to be very angry with me." Silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "Grandma," she said finally, "send me everything. The video, the lawyer's information, everything. I'm booking a flight today. I'll be there tonight." Something in my chest loosened. Not relief, not yet, but the first small recognition that I didn't have to do this alone. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me, you're my grandmother. This is..." She paused. "This is what family is supposed to do." We hung up. I stood in my kitchen in the quiet afternoon and felt the weight of what I'd started settling over me like snow, cold and inevitable, and transforming everything it touched. Outside, a car pulled into my driveway. David's car. I watched through the living room window as David got out of his car. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who believed he still had access to everything. My house, my time, my compliance. He'd gained weight since I'd last seen him, his shirt pulling tight across his middle. 52 years old. Still my child in some fundamental way that made what I was about to do feel like a violation of nature. I opened the door before he could use his key. His key, which shouldn't work anymore, but did because I'd never asked for it back. Never thought I had the right to ask for it back. "Mum!" He smiled, leaned in for a hug I didn't return. His smile faltered. "You okay? You look tired." "I didn't sleep well," I said. Didn't move aside to let him enter. He noticed. I could see him notice the small calculation in his eyes, the shift from casual to watchful. "Can I come in?" I stepped back, let him pass, followed him into the living room where he sat in Robert's chair as if it were his, as if he'd already inherited it, as if I were already gone. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said. "Marcus mentioned he stopped by last night and you seemed confused, disoriented. I'm worried about you living alone like this. I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your options." My options. Not our options, not what I wanted. My options as defined and limited by him. I sat down across from him, folded my hands in my lap the way I'd been taught to sit in church as a girl, still, proper, silent. But I'd stopped praying to be good. I was praying now to be strong. "What did Marcus tell you?" I asked. "That he came by to check on you and you were already in bed. That you seemed out of it, half asleep. He's concerned. We're both concerned." The lies were so smooth they almost sounded like truth, almost made me doubt what I'd seen on the video, what I'd felt in my arm, what I'd held in my hands when they left their forged papers behind. "David," I said, "I want my lockbox back, and my jewellery, and the keys you took." He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The lockbox from my dresser. Grandmother's pearls, my car keys. I want them back today."
Mum, I don't have your lockbox. And the pearls are in a safe deposit box for security, remember? You agreed to that. And your car keys, you gave those to me after you had that dizzy spell last month.
"You said you didn't feel safe driving." Every sentence was a small gaslighting. Small enough that I could doubt myself. Small enough that I could think maybe I had forgotten, maybe I was confused, maybe at 74 I was already too unreliable to trust my own memory. But I had the video, I had the papers, I had a lawyer who'd looked at the evidence and called it what it was: abuse. "I'm revoking the power of attorney I signed in the hospital," I said. His face went very still. "What?" "I met with an attorney this morning, Grace Chen. She's filing the revocation today. I'm also removing you from all my bank accounts. You're no longer authorized to access any of my finances." He stood up. The casualness was gone now, replaced by something harder. Something I'd seen before when he was young and didn't get what he wanted. A cold, calculating anger that knew how to dress itself up as concern. "Mum, you're not thinking clearly. You need that power of attorney. What if something happens to you? What if you have another hospital stay and can't make decisions? I'm protecting you. From what? From making mistakes, from being taken advantage of by people who don't have your best interests at heart." The irony was so sharp, it almost made me laugh. Like lawyers who charge fees to protect elderly clients from financial abuse? Exactly. These people prey on. He stopped, heard what he'd almost said, recalibrated. "Mum, I'm your son. Everything I've done has been to help you, to make things easier, to prepare for when you can't manage on your own anymore. I'm managing fine. You're 74 years old, living alone in a 4-bedroom house you can barely maintain. You're not fine. You're vulnerable. And instead of letting your family help you, you're listening to lawyers who just want to bill you." I stood up too, felt the slight vertigo of shifting from submission to confrontation, like standing up too fast after years of kneeling. "Grace isn't billing me for today," I said. "She's doing this pro bono because she looked at the evidence and saw what I finally see. What evidence? What are you talking about? I could have shown him then. Could have pulled out my phone and played the video of his son standing over my bed with a syringe. Could have confronted him with the forged papers and the unauthorized bank access and the 8 months of systematic theft. But Grace had been clear. Document everything. Say nothing they can use against you. Let them think you're only concerned about the power of attorney. Let them think you don't know the full scope of what they've done. I'm just saying I need to manage my own affairs, I said. That's all. I'm sure you understand. No, I don't understand. This is insane. You're making a huge mistake. And when you realize that, when you need help, and you've burned bridges with the only people who care about you, don't expect me to come running. There it was, the threat dressed as prediction, the warning that if I didn't comply, I would end up alone. But I was already alone. That was the thing he didn't understand. Loneliness wasn't waiting for me as punishment for setting boundaries. I'd been living in it for years, surrounded by people who called themselves family, but treated me like an asset to be managed. I'll take that risk, I said. He stared at me. I could see him trying to find the mother he knew, the one who apologized, who backed down, who eventually said yes to keep the peace. But she was gone. Not dead, just finally awake. This isn't over, he said. No, I agreed, it's not. He left without another word. I watched through the window as he sat in his car for several minutes, phone pressed to his ear, calling Marcus probably, or the nurse, or a lawyer of his own, making his next move in the game I'd only just realized we were playing. My hands were shaking now, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the shocking freedom of saying no and meaning it, and discovering I hadn't been struck by lightning for the transgression. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah landed. Rental car, be there in 90 minutes. Don't let anyone in the house. I texted back. Already had a visitor. Holding firm. 3 dots appeared. Then, proud of you, Grandma. I sat down in Robert's chair. My chair now, I corrected myself. Mine. In my house. Protected by lawyers I'd hired, and decisions I'd made, and boundaries I was learning to defend. The doorbell rang. I looked at my phone. The security camera showed Marcus on my front porch, hands in his pockets, looking up at the camera as if he knew I was watching. I didn't answer. He rang again, knocked, called out, "Grandma, I know you're home. Please open up, I need to talk to you." I sat very still. Let him knock, let him call. Let him stand there in the cold afternoon and learn that I was no longer a door that opened automatically whenever he needed something from me. After 5 minutes, he left. I checked the security footage, watched him get in his car, watched him pause before starting the engine, staring up at my house with an expression I couldn't quite read, but that made something in my chest tighten. He looked hurt. I reminded myself that hurt feelings were not the same as harm, that his discomfort at losing control over my life was not more important than my right to have control over my life, that I was allowed to prioritize my survival over his convenience. But knowing something and feeling it are different territories, and I was still learning the map. Sarah arrived at 4:47 p.m. I watched her pull up in a blue rental sedan, grab a small suitcase from the trunk, and walk up my driveway with the purposeful stride of someone who'd already decided which side of a war she was on. I opened the door before she could knock. "Grandma," she said, and pulled me into a hug that smelled like airports and coffee. And the lavender shampoo she'd used since college. "I'm so sorry this is happening." "Don't be sorry," I said. "Just help me figure out what to do next." We went inside. She set up her laptop on my kitchen table and I made tea. Earl Grey, the way Robert used to make it, strong enough to taste like a decision. Then I told her everything. Not the edited version I'd given Grace, the whole truth. The years of small erosions, the hospital stay, the jewellery and the car keys and the lockbox, the 2 a.m. intrusion, the forged signature, David's visit this afternoon, and the way he'd tried to make me doubt my own memory. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she opened her laptop and pulled up a shared document. "Okay," she said, "we're going to document everything, every incident, every missing item, every conversation. Create a timeline, and then we're going to make sure they never get within 100 feet of your assets again." She worked for hours, built spreadsheets and timelines and evidence logs, showed me how to export the security footage properly, helped me change all my passwords to things they'd never guess, taught me how to enable two-factor authentication on every account. By 9 p.m, we had a battle plan. By 10 p.m, I understood I was in a battle. By 11 p.m, I was ready to fight. Monday morning, Grace met us at the bank. Sarah had stayed through the weekend, sleeping in the guest room that used to be David's bedroom, transforming my house from a place of lonely silence into something that felt almost like a headquarters. We'd ordered takeout and reviewed documents and practiced what I would say when the bank manager asked questions I didn't want to answer. Now we sat in a small conference room with glass walls that made me feel simultaneously protected and exposed. The bank manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation, spread printouts across the table with the careful formality of a doctor delivering bad news. "Mrs. Chen," she said, "I've pulled 6 months of transaction history from all accounts where unauthorized access was granted. I need you to review these carefully and identify any transactions you didn't personally authorize or weren't aware of." I looked down at the first page. My checking account. The one I'd had since 1975. The one where my paychecks had been deposited for 30 years of teaching piano lessons to neighborhood children who mostly quit after 6 months, but occasionally stuck with it. Long enough to play Mozart badly at recitals I'd organise in my living room, highlighted in yellow transfers to accounts I didn't recognise. $2,000 on March 15th, $3,500 on April 3rd, $5,000 on April 28th, $2,800 on May 12th. These, I said, pointing. I didn't authorise these. Patricia made notes. Were you aware these accounts existed? No. Do you know who controls them? I looked at Grace. She nodded slightly. Permission to tell the truth. My son and grandson, I said. I believe they opened accounts in shell company names to hide the transfers. Patricia's face remained professionally neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. She'd seen this before. I wasn't the first elderly woman sitting in this conference room discovering her own children had been stealing from her. We went through every page, every account, checking savings, the investment account Robert had set up in 1982 that had grown slowly and steadily through 43 years of compound interest until it was worth nearly $300,000. Had been worth $300,000. This account shows a series of withdrawals over the past 8 months, Patricia said. Total transfers out, $127,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd known they were stealing. I hadn't known the scale. I couldn't finish the sentence. Sarah reached over and put her hand on mine. Her fingers were warm. Mine had gone cold. Can we trace where it went? Grace asked. We can try, Patricia said, but if the receiving accounts are properly structured, it may be difficult. I'll need to file an internal fraud report. This will trigger an investigation, and given the amounts involved, we're legally required to file a suspicious activity report with federal authorities. Federal authorities. The words made it real in a way I hadn't fully grasped. This wasn't just a family disagreement. This was crime. I want to freeze all accounts, I said. Remove all authorized users except me. Change all access codes. I want it so that only I can withdraw funds. We can do that today, Patricia said. I'll also recommend adding enhanced security protocols. Any transaction over $500 will require in-person verification with 2 forms of identification. And I'd like to add my granddaughter as an emergency contact only, I said. Not an authorized user. Just someone the bank can call if there are concerns about unusual activity. Sarah squeezed my hand. We spent 2 hours in that conference room, signing forms, answering questions, watching Patricia methodically close every avenue my son and grandson had created to access my money. When we finished, she handed me new account numbers and new debit cards and a thick folder of documentation. Mrs. Chen, she said, I know this is difficult, but you're doing the right thing. We see financial elder abuse more often than people realize, and the perpetrators are almost always family members who rely on the victim's shame to keep them silent. Shame. That was the word I'd been avoiding. Not guilt, I had nothing to be guilty for, but shame. The deep, hot mortification of admitting my own son had seen me as nothing more than a resource to exploit. That I'd raised a child who'd grown into someone capable of drugging me in my sleep. "Thank you," I managed to say. Outside, the November air was sharp and cold. Sarah walked me to my car while Grace headed to her office to file additional motions. "How are you doing?" Sarah asked. I looked up at the grey sky, at the bare trees lining the parking lot, at the ordinary Monday morning traffic of people going about their lives unaware that mine had just been dismantled and was being slowly, painfully reconstructed. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I keep thinking about the money. Not because I needed it. I'm fine financially even with what they took, but because of what it means. That they sat across from me at Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas mornings and looked me in the eye, knowing they were stealing from me. That they could do that. That they're capable of that. They're capable of worse," Sarah said quietly. "The drugging was attempted. What would they have done if you'd actually signed? How far were they planning to go?" I'd been trying not to think about that, about what came after the signature, after they had complete control, about nursing homes I hadn't chosen and houses sold without my consent, and the final erasure of everything I'd been. "We stopped them," I said. "You stopped them," Sarah corrected. "You woke up. You fought back. Most people in your situation don't." We stood in the parking lot for a moment longer. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Mrs. Chen?" A man's voice I didn't recognize. "This is Detective Paul Morrison with the County Fraud Division. I'm calling regarding a report filed by First National Bank concerning possible financial exploitation. Would you be available to speak with me this afternoon?" I looked at Sarah. She was already nodding. "Yes, do it. Keep going. Don't stop now." "Yes," I said. "I'm available." He gave me an address, a time. I wrote it down on the back of a bank receipt using a pen Patricia had given me, blue ink, the bank's logo printed along the side. When I hung up, Sarah said, "This is really happening." "Yes," I said, "it is." We drove home in separate cars. I watched her in my rear-view mirror, following me like an escort, making sure I made it safely to the house that was still mine, still under my control, still standing despite everything they'd tried to dismantle. Inside, I made lunch. Neither of us ate. We sat at the kitchen table picking at sandwiches while Sarah researched detective procedures and I tried to process the reality that by the end of today my son would likely know that I'd gone to the police, would know that I'd chosen law over family, would know that I'd stopped being convenient. My phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. David. I didn't answer. He called 3 more times. Then Marcus called, then David again, then a number I didn't recognize that I suspected was the nurse. I let them all go to voicemail. Sarah watched me with something that might have been pride or might have been worry. I couldn't tell which and didn't ask. "You're doing the right thing," she said. Am I? The question came out smaller than I intended. What if I'm wrong? What if there's some explanation I'm not seeing? "Grandma," she reached across the table, "you have video of them drugging you. You have forged signatures. You have $127,000 in unauthorized transfers. There's no explanation that makes that okay. There's no context that justifies it. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is theft. This is abuse. This is crime." I nodded, knew she was right, believed her with my rational mind, while some older, deeper part of me, the part that had been trained for 7 decades to prioritize family peace over personal justice, still whispered that I was being selfish, that I was destroying everything over money, that a good mother would find a way to forgive. But I'd been a good mother for 52 years, and it had gotten me drugged in my sleep. At 3 p.m, we drove to the police station. The police report took 40 minutes. Detective Morrison was methodical and calm, asking questions I'd learned to answer without apologizing for my son's behavior or softening the facts to make them easier to hear. Grace filed the cease and desist letter that evening. By Wednesday, David and Marcus had received legal notice that any further contact or attempted access to my property would result in criminal prosecution. On Thursday, they came anyway, both of them, standing on my porch at 7 p.m. while I watched through the security camera Sarah had repositioned to capture the front door clearly. I called Grace. She arrived within 20 minutes, parked on the street, and walked up to where they stood. "Mrs. Chen has legal representation," she said. "Any communication needs to go through me." David's face was red. "This is insane. She's my mother. I have a right to talk to my own mother." "You have no rights here," Grace said. "You've been served with a cease and desist. The police have an open investigation. Mrs. Chen has made her position clear. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." Through the window, I watched Marcus touch his father's arm, some silent communication I couldn't interpret. David shook him off, pulled an envelope from his jacket. "Fine, give her this." He handed it to Grace. "Tell her I hope her lawyer was worth destroying her family." They left. Grace brought me the envelope. Inside, a check for $127,000 made out in my name, and a note in David's handwriting. "You win, but don't expect us at your funeral." I read it twice, felt nothing, or perhaps felt everything, relief and grief and victory and loss, all compressed into a numbness that felt like wisdom but might have just been exhaustion. "They returned the money," I said. "It's not a gift," Grace replied. "It's evidence they knew exactly what they'd done. Save this note. It's an admission of guilt." Sarah took the cheque and the note, photographed them, filed them in the binder we'd created to hold all evidence of my family's systematic dismantling of my autonomy. That night, I slept without sedatives for the first time in 8 months. And I dreamed of Robert. 3 months later, Sarah and I sat in my garden on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, watching the crocuses I'd planted 40 years ago push through the soil like small acts of defiance. Marcus had sent a text last week, brief, formal, asking if we could talk. I'd replied no. One word, no explanation, no softening, no apology for the boundaries I'd set or the family I'd chosen to walk away from rather than allow them to erase me. David sent nothing, which was answer enough. The district attorney had decided not to prosecute insufficient evidence for criminal charges, they'd said, despite the video and the forged signatures and the returned money that proved guilt. The system, I'd learned, was more interested in protecting families than protecting elderly women from their families. But I had my money back, my house, my autonomy, my capacity to wake up in my own bed without fear of who might be standing over me with a syringe. I had changed the locks, all of them. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. New keys for a new life, even if that life looked remarkably similar to my old one, just without the people who'd been slowly killing me while calling it care. Some nights I still heard Robert's voice in the quiet spaces of the house. Not ghost voice, but memory voice, the way he'd said my name when he came home from work. The particular cadence of his laughter when I'd tell him about my day teaching piano to children who couldn't keep time. He'd be proud of me now, I thought, or horrified, maybe both. He'd loved David with the uncomplicated devotion of fathers who don't see their children clearly. But he'd loved me too, and he'd taught me, without meaning to, that love without respect wasn't love at all. I'd lost my son. Maybe I'd never really had him, not in the way I'd believed anyway. But I'd found something I'd misplaced decades ago, the sharp, clarifying knowledge that I was still a person, still capable of choice, still deserving of dignity. The price was loneliness. But it was a different loneliness than before, clean and chosen, rather than the eroding isolation of being surrounded by people who only wanted pieces of me. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself, the mother, the grandmother, the elderly woman who keeps saying yes because you've been trained your whole life to believe that your value lies in your usefulness to others, I want you to know something. Your silence isn't kindness. It's self-abandonment. Your boundaries aren't cruelty. They're confirmation that you still exist. Your no isn't selfishness. It's the last necessary act of self-preservation. They will call you difficult. They will say you've changed. They will imply that your resistance is evidence of decline, that a healthy, rational person would simply comply with the plans they've made for your life, your money, your remaining years. They're wrong. You don't owe them access. You don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them one more moment of pretending that their convenience matters more than your survival. It's not too late. Whatever age you are, whatever they've already taken, whatever you've already lost, it's not too late to wake up and fight back and discover that you were always stronger than they needed you to believe. I was 74 when I stopped being convenient. Best decision I ever made. Sarah brought me tea, Earl Grey, strong enough to be called a decision. We sat in silence while the afternoon light turned gold across my garden, across my house, across the life I'd reclaimed one boundary at a time. Somewhere across town, my son and grandson were living their lives without me. Perhaps they told people I'd gone senile. Perhaps they genuinely believed they'd been helping. Perhaps they'd already found another elderly relative to manage, to protect, to slowly erase. I hoped not. But it wasn't my responsibility to save them from themselves anymore. The crocuses bloomed, the house stood, the locks held, and I was, for the first time in 8 years, finally at peace with being alone.